So I'll introduce us individually so you know who we are. This is Spike Steffenhagen from Hard Rock Comics and Rock and Roll Comics. I think I can let you guys introduce yourselves, actually.
I'm Vivek Tiwari. I'm the author of The Fifth Beatle, the Brian Epstein story.
Which has been optioned by the Beatles to be a major motion picture soon.
We are turning it into a major. It's not optioned by the Beatles. They've given it their blessing for the music,
yeah.
but they're not making it. So yeah.
Well, very
But
good.
they've given us their permission.
I'm J. Allen Sanford from Rock and Roll Comics.
I'm Mary Fleener. I've done a lot of work for musicians, guitar player, James Brown, the Ramones, and did my own, self-published my own comic called Chicken Slacks, where we illustrated rock and roll lyrics. And I play the band.
The Whit Billies is her band. Anybody that wants to go see some good music.
Michael Allshanker, and I'm representing the current line of Rock and Roll Comics, which I have down at Artist Alley. Slayer and Exodus, the first ones out of the gate. A Northern California publisher is doing it, not related to what these guys did. I mean, not, in terms of the same publisher.
Next Generation, this is called.
The evolution.
The Evolution, yes. And what's your pet project? What's coming up, Michael?
The Clash.
Written by.
I'm very excited about the book. All right.
Well, music and comics have long had a relationship with each other, even back in the 50s. Yes.
Oh,
Yeah,
Oh, I'm sorry, James. That's all right.
sorry.
yeah, I'm James Hudnall, and I've been in comics for 30 years, and I did the Metallica comic. I've also worked with Bon Jovi, and I've had some other connections to the music industry.
And your Metallica comic was fully authorized by the band, wasn't
Yeah, it
it?
was fully authorized. Malibu produced a comic line called Rocket Comics back in the 90s, and so that was for the Rocket Comics line.
I think I'd like to work backwards, actually, and start talking about the Rocket Comics line, because yours was the first that was actually something done in conjunction with the rock bands, was it not?
Yeah, the producer, the publisher of that, I don't know if he was a publisher, but he was the editor. He worked in music industry for like Universal Music and stuff like that, and he had connections to a lot of musical acts. And so he managed to get licensing deals for a lot of different bands and artists. Basically, there were, I don't forget how many they did, but I did the Metallica one, which was right at the time that they were starting to become a mainstream band. Because up until that time, they were kind of like, for a hardcore rock group, they were kind of like, they had their cult following. But when they came out with that Black album, they had Sandman on it and a bunch of other songs, that made them like a big mainstream superstars that they became. And the comic came out just at the beginning of that. So, unfortunately, we only got to do one issue. It was supposed to be a 3-issue story telling us the history of the band, but we gave it our best shot, and didn't work out. Malibu kind of, the whole industry started to implode in the mid-90s, and it kind of got caught up in some of that. So we didn't get to finish the project, but it was interesting. I did not get to beat the band. For whatever reason, they didn't want to talk to us. I think they were on tour at the time. Other people that Malibu's Rocket Line, they did get to meet their bands that they worked on, which just made me kind of envious, but that's the way it goes.
I find it fascinating that the bands were willing to participate in the process at all, from the authorization on up, because in the old days, the early music and comic crossovers really had very little to do with the performers they purported to be about. In the 50s, there was a Ricky Nelson comic that was basically just illustrated Ozzy and Harriet stories. In the 60s, when you saw rock and roll or music turn up in comics, it was usually very jokey. There's an issue of the Fantastic Four with the Thing in the Beatles wig. The Beatles made crossover appearances in romance comics. None of them, they purported to be about these bands. It was just about having a picture of, the Beatles on the cover and getting your attention that way, and then selling you a regular comic book story.
And my late friend Steve Gerber did the Kiss comic in the 70s that Marvel put out.
Which was an excellent music comic, but it again wasn't about the band. It could have been about any group of superheroes, basically. They just plugged Kiss in.
But they did put their blood in the ink at the printing camp.
Isn't that great marketing?
Yeah.
But not enough blood.
Yeah.
Well, as of the 70s, we started seeing some comics that really were about the musicians and really about music. And that really kind of started in the undergrounds, the series that Mary Fleener mentioned. And also Dennis Kitchen did a magazine called Bop, had a couple of unauthorized biographies. And of all companies, Marvel actually did one of the first mainstream major music biographies. It was their Beatles comic. It was a magazine-size edition. And they wanted authorization, couldn't arrange it for some reason. They went and they did it unauthorized. And it's actually a very good book. You've seen it, I'm sure, right? So that kind of opened the floodgates for a lot more of that kind of thing, mainly from the undergrounds. But then in 1989, Todd Lawrence started Rock and Roll Comics. And because we got threatened to be sued by a lot of people, it got a lot of press and a lot of people found out about it. And now we have Rock and Roll Comics and music comics. There's a New Kids comic book that Harvey put out. Marvel did a series of rock and roll biographies. Marvel Rocks, I think it was called. They did the Rolling Stones, they did Bob Marley. Some of the other ones from Malibu there, they did the Santana comic, did they not?
Yeah.
Did they do a Pantera comic?
They did.
Yeah,
It was
they
black and white, it was
Yeah.
the first black and white one.
And they
There
did
was,
Yes, and
Did they really?
a lot of
Wow.
bands, yeah.
But why don't you tell us a little bit about yours, because yours really were the ones that inspired Todd, that kind of thing. He was a big underground collector. So tell us a little bit about what you were doing in the 70s that inspired him so much.
Well, I didn't really start until about 1984.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Yeah. And, I was thinking about this driving on the way down. A really good rock and roll song is like a comic. And a comic is like a song. But a really good rock and roll song is when you tell it like it is. And that's sort of where I always came from about my being a musician and doing my artwork. But Dennis Kitchen did publish a Grateful Dead comics where there was 4 issues, and we illustrated the songs that we wanted. I did St. Stephen's, so it was very psychedelic. And of course, working with the Grateful Dead, it was work for hire. They wanted to keep the artwork, and it was, for $150 a page. I cringe when I think maybe in the future they might make a T-shirt out of something I drew, but oh well. I just really wanted to do St. Stephen. And then there was a guy named Robert Newman at the Village Voice, and he was doing a monthly series of people illustrating songs. So I did the James Brown song, "I Got You, I Feel Good," and I told Robert at the time, you talk to the lawyers that James Brown, has, because they're out, they're assholes. And he goes, well, no, I think it's going to be okay. And I go, well, you never do that. So I'd already done the artwork. He got a hold of somebody legal, and they took someone to lunch and someone else out for dinner, and then it was okay. So that was published, and then it ended up in the Star Time box set of James Brown, where they shoved it down about this small, so if you have really good eyesight, you can see it. And so, the illustrating of the song lyrics is just so logical. I mean, it just so lends itself to comics. So about 1991, I started self-publishing, because that's how I got started in comics anyway. And I thought it'd be fun to do this little anthology, and copyright be damned. I just got hold of my favorite artists like Robert Armstrong and Dennis Warden, and in fact that's how I got to know these guys, because Todd wanted to publish Stick Boy by Dennis Warden. He had been with Fantagraphics, and he was unhappy with working with them, so he met Todd. And all I did was cut the color for, I think, Stick Boy, like 1 issue. That's how I met these guys, so that's the connection there. Anyway, the thing I did was Chicken Slacks, and I did 4 issues. We had a psychedelic issue, a blues issue, a punk issue, and then anything you wanted to do. And everybody loved them. People did really, like Mark Martin did Let's Get It On by Marvin Gaye, but he had these 2 frogs singing to each other in a pond, and it was just really great. Then I started getting orders from the magazines from lawyers in Hollywood. And that's why I decided I better stop at issue 4, because they were fishing. And so anyway,
Lawyers put the kibosh on a lot of music.
they're just such pain in the neck. They have no sense of humor.
You also did you worked on the Weird Tales of the Ramones box set, did you not?
Yeah, well, Fantagraphics did these series of books that were square-shaped about 1997 or 98, and one was a music issue. and I wrote a story about meeting Joey Ramone down at Comic-Con. It was at 2nd and B. And I was so excited to meet him because even though I'd seen the Ramones in '77 up in Hollywood, I never bought any of their albums because I didn't have any money. And so I was moved to Encinitas in '81, and I went to the thrift store, and there were 4 albums of the Ramones in perfect condition. So I nabbed them, and when I worked at my first comic, Slutburger, I listened to the Ramones nonstop while I was drawing it. So when I saw Joey, I was like, oh my God, I do a comic on Slutburger, here it is, and I listen to your music, and like, Allah. And he was just really great, but he was so tall, I was like, hi. But he was surrounded by groupies, and I had about exactly maybe 2 minutes to talk to him. So that ended up in Weird Tales of the Ramones that Hugh Brown put together, and that was a 4 CD set of the Ramones music, and a comic book in the middle with, you know, William Stout and John Pound, anthology, comic anthology in the CD box set. It was really terrific. So that's how